According to Reuters, UN members on Monday adopted a deal aimed at improving the way the world copes with rising migration. But almost 30 countries stayed away from the ceremony in Morocco. The pact meant to foster cooperation on migration was agreed in July by all 193 UN members except the United States, but only 164 formally signed it at the meeting on Monday. President Donald Trump's administration said that the global approach to the issue was not compatible with U.S. sovereignty.
On the 10th and 11th of December, our heads of state will be signing this deeply damaging document produced by those highly educated, highly salaried and unelected people at the United Nations. They have produced this compact that will silence free speech, media freedom, and if you think you're in control of your borders, think again. This compact backs the EU and the UN's aim to flood our nations with 59 million migrants by 2025. Yes, you heard right, 59 million migrants by 2025. Yes, the clock is ticking. It's nearly 2019, just 6 years to go. Why are they doing this, I hear you ask? Because in the year 2000, these numpties came up with the idea that our populations were declining and therefore needed replacing. But how things have changed. EU unemployment is at a record high. Some countries have 50% youth unemployment. In some areas of Greece, it's even up to 75%. Most countries that have taken in migrants are finding they are unemployable. On average, migrants have 13% unemployment, have a 13% employment rate, so are a burden on the state. Even Merkel's immigration spokesman said that up to 3/4 of immigrants will still be unemployed in 5 years, and for many others, we need up to 10 years. The statistics are long and grim. Voters in the UK, yes, you, pay attention. Mrs May will sneak into Marrakesh to sign this dodgy deal, just like Gordon Brown before her did when he sneaked in to sign the Lisbon Treaty. No nice group photo, just her signature that binds all of us to uncontrolled immigration. Did you think that we're taking back control of our borders in her Brexit shambles deal? Think again. Remember, the UN and the globalists want to flood our continent with 59 million migrants by 2025. Mrs Merkel is sound on this subject. She says nation states should be prepared to give up sovereignty and it is nationalistic not to sign. So UK citizens, did you think that Brexit means taking back control of our sovereignty? Not with this globalist deal. As the document and the EU states, immigration is inevitable, desirable and necessary. This is after we have poured billions into Africa. Africa is rich in resources. We should be encouraging them to stay at home. Did you know that Africa's population is 1.2 billion? Europe's is 741 million. And did you know that the UK, Europe, China, India and Japan combined could fit inside of Africa? And then there is the Middle Eastern immigration. These two continents pouring into our countries is unsustainable. In the compact, there is no provision for how much this is going to cost. The infrastructure needed, yet they bang on about climate change, sustainability and overcrowding. And there is the complete absence of democratic deficit of this compact. No one asked the voters whether we wanted this. No one asked us if we wanted our culture and identity crushed. And why? Because they know they would never get this past the voters. And then there is the serious question of free speech and how we refer to migrants, refugees and asylum seekers. In their eyes, they're all one. Children will take precedence. Sounds sensible. Not really, because it will encourage migrants to people traffic their children for eventual family reunification. We will not be allowed to use the term migrants or illegal migrants. They all become irregular migrants. The media will be told what to write and the language to be used. Social media will also be controlled more than they are already. It will be illegal not to use their prescribed language.
Has heard us talk many times about UN Agenda 21. And of course, it was an agenda for the 21st century to control populations, to confine them to megacities, to keep them off the land and otherwise control them. There's another UN agenda. I guess we should call this one Invasion 21. This is a document we're going to take a look at right now from the year 2000. And what this shows is what many of us have been talking about. Many people have called it the Great People Replacement. Well, they were talking about that 17 years ago. It was a plan We've seen this, and they've sold it to us as a reaction to events like wars, which in many cases we create. But they sold it as a reaction to war, to other catastrophes, but no, it was their plan all along. So we're going to take a look at that because this is truly warfare against Western civilization, the last bulwark against global governance. So let's take a look at this article here from WND. They look at the plot to replace Europeans with refugees. And they say this is a UN document from 2000. It's called Replacement Migration. Is it a solution to declining and aging populations? That's the UN's document. And we'll take a look at that in just a moment. It details plunging birth rates across Europe and, of course, also in the U.S. and Japan. And it identifies a solution to those declining birth rates: mass immigration that you're now seeing. They say without the migration of populations from the developing world, it reasons, economies will suffer because of labor shortages and falling tax revenues. According to the UN documents, the meeting was attended by a host of government and non-governmental organizations and individuals. You know those people that they like to call shareholders or stakeholders? That's what they call them. I can think either way. They're the ones who are going to own everything. You are going to be the property. And those are the types of people that we see attending these events like Bilderberg and others, that some of them public, some of them secret. Some of these organizations were the International Organization for Migration. That's a UN group. And it said that mass migration is not only, quote, inevitable, but necessary. Also, the UN Population Fund, a group dedicated to family planning, in other words, depopulation, and the spread of contraceptives. So they talk about this. At the same time, they say, well, you know, we got to solve this problem. There's too much of a falling birth rate in the West while they're still pushing family planning. It's not about that. And it's not about saving the entitlement programs that the bankers and the government workers have pushed on Americans and those in developing countries. It was the IMF that was accused of rent-seeking when they stopped encouraging third world countries to invest in their infrastructure and to start borrowing money for their social programs. And that's where we are today. And of course, this is the next step. They said immigrants will not prevent the long-run aging of the population, except in the highly unlikely scenario of a 10-fold increase in annual immigration levels. There we go. That's what they want. And that's what we're seeing now. Let's take a look at the document itself. From the UN. Replacement migration, is it a solution to declining and aging populations? And this is the way it begins. They say the UN projections indicate that over the next 50 years, the populations of virtually all countries of Europe, as well as Japan, will face population decline and population aging. They say, taking a look at this, we see that we need to have replacement migration for 8 low fertility countries. And I name them: France, Germany, Italy, Japan, Republic of Korea, that's South Korea, Russian Federation, United Kingdom, and the United States. That includes us, folks. And then they specifically focus on Europe. They say 2 regions, Europe and the European Union. They go on to say replacement migration refers to the international migration that a country would need to offset population decline and population aging resulting from low fertility and mortality rates. Now, if you think that this is all of this that is happening, as we see in Europe, they say, we've got to bring these refugees in. This is a crisis. No, it was a plan, a 17-year-old plan. They laid it out here in the documents. You have to understand, it's not an accident. It's not a reaction to what is happening. And it is not even a solution to what they're concerned about.
Ladies and gentlemen of the press, dear guests, it's nice to have you here on our Strasbourg press conference. And I would like to say some words on the Global Compact on Migration. On the 10th and 11th of December, there will be an international congress in Marrakesh, Morocco, with regard to this Global Compact on Migration. And the participating countries are set to sign this agreement. And although this joint agreement isn't binding, it's still meant to be the legal framework on which the participating countries commit themselves to build new legislation. And one basic element of this new agreement is the extension of the definition of hate speech. The agreement wants to criminalize migration speech. Criticism of migration will become a criminal offense. And media outlets, and that also concerns you, that give room to criticism of migration can be shut down. The Compact for Migration is legalization of mass migration. It's declaring migration as a human right. So in fact, it will become impossible to criticize Ms. Merkel's welcome migrants politics without being at risk to be jailed for hate speech. So this agreement, to our humble opinion, is a coup d'etat of pro-migrant liberal globalists. And it will greatly benefit multinationals. Because you know, countries who import the third world will become the third world. And it's absolutely clear, and you all know that in third world countries, multinationals dictate the rules. It will become impossible to state that integration of migrants from Islamic countries in Western cultures is impossible. It will become impossible to mention the fact that mass migration deteriorates the Western welfare systems and the fact that mass migration leads to explosive surge of rape and murder. And this makes the timing of the Compact on Migration significant as we are heading towards elections of the European Parliament next year. With this treaty, the EU member states and the European Commission are destroying the political level playing field. It allows them to cut funding of migration critical political parties and silencing the political opposition. And to me, I would like to state this very clearly, the Tommy Robinson case in the UK is the first example to be set, and it will be an example that will follow, and probably during the elections, based on the global compact on migration. So, that means the conclusion can already be that European Parliament elections will be rigged. And only the United States of America, Australia and Hungary have indicated not to sign this agreement. So we herewith urge every country that opposes mass migration to reject this compact. Thank you.
Oui, merci.
Yeah, thanks, Marcel. I think the question before us right now is quite a significant one because the UN has as a declared objective to act for peace and stability in the world. And you see that they've moved wholly outside the ambit of that role, and they're multiplying actions right now to defend globalist propaganda, specifically in terms of promoting massive immigration towards the European continent. That's why in March 2000, that's almost more than 18 years ago, a UN report said that in order to fill the demographic holes in Europe, they needed 59 million migrants arriving in Europe by 2025. Well, we can possibly rejoice that this objective has not been reached. However, you can see that their idea is to organize massive migration in this direction. The declaration in 2016, the declaration in New York, related to two things. First of all, the Pact of Refugees, which has been a subject here in the European Parliament. The European Parliament wanted to even go further than the UN Pact a few months ago. And the text that has been referred to by Marcel de Graaf, the Global Compact on Migration, the objective of which is to make migration, the right migration, to be a new human right. And that has found echo in what Jacques Attali said. You know, he was the counsellor of François Mitterrand, Sarkozy, a number of French presidents, in other words, and also he was the spiritual father of Macron, Jacques Attali, who wrote a book called The Man Nomad. He arrived in Riyadh yesterday for Davos in the desert, and yet which has been boycotted by many people, and yet Jacques Attali, writer of The Man, the Nomad, has nonetheless gone to Riyadh, despite the fact that Mr. Khashoggi was murdered in particularly barbaric fashion on the orders of Riyadh. Furthermore, okay, you've got this UN wish and the European Commission as well. They're also telling us here in the hemicycle, here in Strasbourg, that they wish to restrict illegal immigration, but how? And they want to promote legal migration, as if you had to choose between one and the other. Indeed, one, it's not a zero-sum game, one is added to the other, and it's extremely difficult to control this anarchistic crossing of borders right now. Legal immigration is promoted by the European institutions. One commissioner said immigration was a moral imperative and also an economic imperative, a social imperative for our aging continent. So these are two prongs which are being developed by the UN and by EU. What's the moral argument? Well, they're war victims. A lot of them aren't fleeing conflict zones, but difficult economic situations. And the economic argument is, of course, that we will need this immigration here in Europe. Well, these are false news arguments. We are undermining what we're doing. We are brain draining their elites. And we are making that these people and our own people don't feel at home in their own homes and their own territories according to their homegrown values and customs. Of course this undermines things generally. And we are depriving ourselves of the means and capacities of doing anything over in their countries, because the cost of migration, which it's almost unlawful to try to estimate now, but it's tens of billions of euros. We cannot spend that money twice, and we can't spend that money in the countries at the source of migration. Of course, paying that aid has to be conditional on the mastery of migration flows towards Europe. So the demographic argument and obviously this idea of underpinning birth rates here in the European Union where it's too low and giving more money to families, of course, would enable us to renew generations without supporting those in favour of this massive migration. Of course, the UN's report is very worrying, but at the same time, I believe the credibility of the UN in migration questions has been seriously undermined. You can see that Trump has said he's not going to sign the pact. We have heard declarations of different heads of government, Hungary, Poland and Austria, saying that they weren't going to sign the pact either. And let me wind up by saying that the United Nations organization seems to be wholly colonized by those arguing in favor of Islam. Why do I say that? Well, recently the UN has asked France to abrogate its 2004 legislation saying that you can't wear a burqa on the grounds that it is undermining human rights. And yet, we know that why do people wear burqas in the public? It's either worn by women who are suffering pressure from their surroundings, their family, or making a religious statement. One of these two reasons. In other words, it's not really a question of choice unless it is. So the UN is interfering increasingly in national policies which are wholly within the ambit of national sovereignty. They are globalist. Thank you. I'll speak Dutch. Yeah, I've got 1 minute, which I want to add a few things to that. In the beginning of, or spring of 2018, there was a minor incident in Flanders. Theo Frank, the State Secretary for Migration, and Jan Bon, and the Minister of Foreign Affairs, said that they would sign the compact on migration in Morocco. They kept it pretty secret. They're playing the cards very close to their chest. However, when it came out, there was a rather lively debate. First of all, Theo Franken, who is a bit like Berlusconi in Italy, and he said that he was against migration, but given that he wanted to sign the migration compact in Marrakesh, you could see that he was aligning himself with the migration policy of the EU. Frank was defending things that it was all done behind the screens, and the fact that the statement actually wasn't secret at all. It could be found on the website of the Maltese government, which of course put the cat among the pigeons in Flanders. Now, working together in the ENF group is very important in order to ensure that we can slow down things and ensure that we can reform migration policy within the EU as they intend to promote it. Matteo Salvini clearly is saying the right things, and there are those who feel that more moderate parties than us will resolve the issue, but that is not the issue. We need a new migration policy, and that's what we're going to have to look to in 2019.